You're listening to Language Nerds Do Earth, the podcast about linguistics, culture, travel, and how they're all connected. Now, it's time for your language nerd hosts. One in China, one in Spain. It's Patrice and Rachel.
Hello everyone, I'm Patrice.
And I'm Rachel.
And this is Language Nerds Do Earth. We are on episode number 13.
Lucky 13.
Today we're going to talk about something called third culture kids. Interesting.
Yeah, if you have no idea what that is, don't worry. We're going to dive right into that.
Yeah, we're going to take you through it. It's going to be okay.
Yeah, then we'll hear our Lost in Translation story from Sean in China. But first,
we have some language news. This was just a really fun little article I found on Twitter the other day. It's called How Pigs Rooted Their Way into the German Language. So Germans have had an unusually intense relationship with pigs, which shows up in peculiar phrases in everyday conversations, often hearkening back to the Middle Ages in ways good and bad.
Yeah, I had no idea that there was such an abundance of phrases using pig. I don't speak German, but it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it's funny, actually. I do speak German, but I never really thought about how much people use the word Schwein in German. So Schwein is pig, and then they also use the word Sau, which means sow.
Sow, yeah.
Is it? Sow, okay, which we don't really use very much in English. But yeah, it's true. I was telling Rachel that I feel like when I was in Germany about 11 years ago, I think at some point I was just like, Schwein must mean something else, because it is everywhere.
Why are they talking about pigs so much? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, no, for some reason it just ended up in a lot of phrases. So this article talks about that, which is pretty interesting. So do you want to kind of get into it, Rachel?
Yeah. So according to the article, there are around 150 German phrases that contain some reference to swine, which is completely... I was completely surprised by that. And a lot of times, I think in most cultures, pigs have kind of a negative connotation of being dirty or being gluttonous or being just gross, you know?
Right.
But I think a lot of these phrases that they put in the article were either neutral or kind of a positive connotation as well.
Yeah. And there were some negative ones as well. But for the most part, it's a lot of positive phrases, like you said. So we have a few here. For example, Schwein gehabt, past tense, I had pig. And it means I had luck. This has two main theories. The first one is that in a card game in the 16th century, an ace was called a sow. Zao, and then whoever drew the sow was lucky. And then the other theory is that in early modern Germany, when they were still working on their food security situation, owning a pig was a way to ensure that the family wouldn't starve. So it was good fortune in tough times. I feel like pigs might be good luck in China as well in that case.
Okay. A couple of the other expressions, I'm going to go for this.
Yeah.
Mein Englisch ist unter alles Sau. My English is under pig, meaning your English skills are not very good.
Ah, yeah. Unter alles Sau. That's interesting.
Yeah, whereas we would say maybe it's rusty or it's not up to par, which I guess would be a sports one.
Yeah, not up to par. That's true. So in this article, they also mentioned that they kind of use pig the same way we use sport expressions in English. use sports analogies all the time.
I think especially American English. Mm-hmm. We have lots of baseball references, or I don't know, football maybe.
American culture is also relatively competitive.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing that plays into it is the sports and competition.
I buy that.
Yeah. Another one they have is voll wie ein Schwein. The literal translation is full, like not empty, so full like a pig.
Uh-huh.
What we would say is drunk as a skunk.
Yeah.
Basically.
One that I really like is die Sau rauslassen.
Die Sau rauslassen. Mm-hmm.
To let the pig out.
Uh-huh.
To express a desire to party or go wild.
Yeah, I think that's like, in English we would say, who let the dogs out, right?
Exactly. Come
let the
on.
dogs out. Yeah, that is really cool. I like that a lot too. I recognize my pigs by their walk. Ich erkenne meine Schweine am Gang. So I recognize a situation or a person, from past experience. So that one would be like kind of, if you hear hoof prints, it's not zebras, maybe? No.
Maybe. I was thinking more like, I don't know. I would say something like, I would know that anywhere. I would know that whatever, anywhere, that walk or that laugh or that.
Yeah. This sounds like a phrase I would use like as I get older, as I have more experience. Like, I've seen that pig before.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think my pig is whistling.
Yeah.
Used to express disbelief or astonishment at a situation.
Mm-hmm.
So the article says, like, in English we would say, when pigs fly.
Right. It's not really exactly the same.
Not exactly, no.
But it's pretty close for sure.
Mm-hmm. One other one that I really liked is, we haven't yet kept pigs together. And that's like when somebody's trying to like be real like close or like sharing intimate things with you.
Yeah.
And you're like, I don't know you yet.
Slow down.
We haven't even kept pigs together yet.
Take me out to dinner first, man. At least like help me feed my pigs. Same thing.
That's funny.
Yeah, that's really cute. Yeah, German is such an interesting language. People have asked, like, which language do I like more, German or Spanish, since they're, like, at pretty comparable levels, and honestly, like, they just have very different energies.
Mm-hmm.
Like German, I've said before in past episodes about how it has so many rules, and that is kind of similar to the way Germans live their lives. Like, here are the rules and you must follow them, like that's just what you do. And even like at a crosswalk, people might walk across when it's red, but if there are children around, it's just like the unspoken rule is that you don't cross the road when the traffic man is red, because you want to set a good example for the kid.
Okay.
Whereas Spanish is just so relaxed, and that's kind of how Spanish and Latin American culture is, just kind of like, everything will be cool. Put this verb here,
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the grammar, let's be honest, is not that simple, but...
Yeah. Okay. Cool. German pigs. Germans and their pigs. And also the graphic is really cute. There's like a little pig in lederhosen. So we'll obviously link to that. Whenever we mention an article, we always link to it in the show notes. So this will be in languagenerdsdoearth.com, episode 13 show notes. You can find it.
And the article, has lots of really cute illustrations, so it's worth checking out.
For sure. Yeah, to explain the phrases.
Yeah.
All right. So, let's talk about third culture kids.
Mm-hmm. So, what is a third culture kid?
Yeah, the definition is very broad, actually. The term comes from a kid who has parents from two different cultures and then grows up in a third culture. I think that happens very often. Like, I have some friends here in China. The mother is from Latin America and the father is from Holland, and they are raising a baby together here in China.
Right. So then the child grows up in a completely unique culture to those which he has, like, ties to. So it's a really interesting balance of, like, what do you keep from your own parents' culture and what do you have of the culture where you grew up. It's very fascinating how people experience childhood, adulthood, when they've been raised this way.
I think, like, a classic example is military kids. Yeah. Whose parents have moved them all over the world. And that, it doesn't really follow the same definition, but like I said, it's a very broad term. I remember for the first time meeting kids in high school and college who are military. Do we say military brats? Is that like an offensive term?
I think that's what they call themselves.
Yeah. I remember being like, so where are you from? And they would just kind of roll their eyes and be like, well, everywhere. And it was like, all right.
Yeah.
But now I kind of understand what they were kind of getting at, which is something that our guests kind of talked about. But I forgot to mention, you know who else is a third culture kid?
Obama.
Yeah.
Yes, he's a third culture kid. His dad is Kenyan. His mom is American, yeah.
He grew up in Hawaii, but also Indonesia.
Right.
I want to say. So yeah, we talked to two of our friends. Do you want to introduce David first?
Yeah. David is a friend of mine from, we both studied abroad together in South Korea.
Hi everyone, my name is David, and I'm from Japan, France, and the US. So just to kind of analyze this, my dad, he's French, and my mom, she's half Japanese, half American. But I was born in Japan. Then I lived in the US for a bit until I was 6, and then I moved to France, where I stayed there from 7 to around 18 years old.
His parents live in France, and he just moved to Dublin.
Oh, he did? He got that job.
Yeah,
that's right.
English,
working at Google.
Oh my God.
No big deal.
French,
Cool.
Yeah.
And regarding my native language, well, interestingly, it would technically be Japanese and English, because English is a language we spoke at home with my parents and my sisters, and Japanese was a language that I learned at school because I was in a Japanese kindergarten called yochien. But once we moved from Japan to the US, I was 4. I completely stopped speaking Japanese, and so as of today, I don't remember. I mean, I remember some parts of it, but there's no way I could actually converse in Japanese. So I think interestingly, although Japanese is technically my native language, after the age of 4, I completely stopped speaking it. And I'd say that French actually replaced my Japanese because I moved to France when I was 7, and from there on, I was fully immersed in the French educational system. So that's really the language that I, developed and nurtured, like reading books at school or conversational speaking, reading, writing, talking, etc. Although English and Japanese would be my native language, French was the language that I mastered the most until I was 24. After the age of 24, I enrolled in this 2-year master's degree with the first year in London and the second year in Los Angeles. And during those 2 years, I barely spoke French at all. I mean, of course, there was the occasional talking with my friends from France, etc. But I was really immersed in this very intense master's program where everything was in English, and it was very rigorous and very demanding. And until now, my French, which used to be my dominant language, reversed with English, which now became the language that I guess I'm the most comfortable with and the one that I guess master the most.
I talked to my friend Cecil here in Shenzhen.
So, my name's Cecil. I'm from... I grew up mostly in Pakistan, but I'm French, Chinese, French.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I spent some time in France, but I guess I don't really tell people I'm from France unless... Yeah, sounds weird.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Why do you think it sounds weird?
Because I didn't grow up there. It's primarily when I'm talking to French people, and I tell them, even in French, in the same language, and I tell them I'm French, and they're like, "Oh, you're French, cool. Your accent's so different."
Yeah.
I'm like,
yeah,
I didn't grow up in France.
I want to kind of give a little bit of backstory. His grandmother is Hakka Chinese. So Hakka is a minority group actually here, close to where I am. And I've actually met a few other people who are Hakka here in Shenzhen.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, his grandmother, I think she left China. Well, she was in her 20s when she left China.
Okay, so simply put, I'm the product of one Chinese parent. And even that's weird because he wasn't born in China or anything. But he was born in Bangladesh. And they've lived in the subcontinent, generally speaking, throughout.
Okay, so he identifies as from...
Chinese, actually.
Okay.
I mean, Hakka Chinese specifically,
Hakka.
yeah. And yeah, my mom's European, I guess, Dutch, French, officially French, French national. I lived in France. I mean, I was born in Nice and lived there for a few years and then moved to Pakistan as a kid.
So would you consider your native languages then to be... All right, we've got a long list, actually. So now he's in Pakistan, 5 or 6 years old. He speaks French fluently. He speaks Hakka Chinese, which is very different from Mandarin. Mm-hmm. And then English, because I don't know if it's an official language of Pakistan, but everybody in Pakistan speaks English.
Okay.
And then eventually he also learns Urdu.
My family, being Chinese expats living in Pakistan, felt like they really needed to be close to the community. Made sure I went for Chinese classes every weekend, like Mandarin Chinese classes.
Okay.
So at home we spoke Hakka and English.
Okay.
And occasionally Urdu. Mm-hmm. My dad did want to make sure I was still connected to the French community. So also every weekend I would at some point end up going for French lessons.
So you had
just to keep that up.
Yeah. That's impressive. You must have been tired of language classes.
I was extremely I remember
busy kid.
Yeah, right? I mean, it's really a gift that his parents gave him to speak so many languages, but Jesus.
Yeah.
It must be exhausting.
I mean, yeah, I think as we're gonna hear them talk about, it's really unique to be able to speak so many languages, and it's also, it can be, I think, a burden.
I think so too, yeah.
Are you more comfortable expressing yourself, speaking or writing in one language in particular? Well, yes. I'll go back again and say that, until the age of 24, where I'd done my, my whole junior high school bachelor's in French. But once I did this 2-year master's degree, that's where my English became so much better. And I completely left, French aside. And I had this job interview, actually last week, and it was in Ireland. So it's an English speaking company, but the role was to kind of work with the French market. So you need to speak French, right? And I had to do the interview in French, and I completely underestimated how I needed to perfect my French, actually, because it was quite difficult. There's all these keywords, business keywords and all this kind of, speech rhetorics that I used to know and that I was fully comfortable with, but it just took me so much time to express myself in a way that I wanted to. And sometimes, I would speak and I would have the conversation in my head, it would be in English, and I would have to pause to kind of, translate it, but I couldn't translate it literally because that makes no sense. So I had to, find a way to construct my sentence in a credible way, in a way that makes sense and sounds authentic and native. And it's kind of embarrassing because the thing is, my French accent is definitely French. There's no way that when I speak French, people be like, oh, you know, like he sounds American. And I think it's worse because when you sound authentic but you struggle to express yourself, it kind of highlights you in a way that you would be maybe, you know, borderline ignorant or stupid, or, you know, you have this cognitive disability or something. And that's always something that I fear about, because I sound native, but my expression is just kind of awkward and poor. And sometimes I'm thinking, you know what, maybe just try to fake this American accent when you speak French, because if you struggle to express yourself, at least people will think, oh, okay, it's not his native language, so, you know, he'll have a free pass.
So when you have so many different parts of your identity, it's really hard to answer the question, where are you from?
Mm-hmm.
Whenever I meet a native French speaker, and particularly somebody who's very, very French,
Mm-hmm.
I like to point out that I'm an anglophonic French, just so that, you know, people get a sense of who I am. It's like, I'm French. Yeah, hold your excitement, you know?
Yeah.
There's a caveat to that.
You feel that you have these different parts of yourself, but maybe the culture where you grew up is not that of your parents,
Mm-hmm.
and so maybe you're one thing, but you've not really lived in that culture.
Yeah.
And so maybe you don't have the same experiences.
Yeah, Cecil talks about that, like how he went to move back to France for a time as an adult.
So when I first moved back to France, interestingly, immigrations gave me a hard time.
Oh no, because they were like
French passport and stuff, and they're like blattered something at me that I could barely understand. And of course, like, I hadn't lived in France for the longest time, so, you know, I was uncomfortable speaking French, and they were like, yeah, something's not right about you, off you go. So I went off to the side, and they were like, yeah, questioned me for about an hour.
Wow.
Opened up my stuff. Yeah. So I was like, I am not going to get out of this airport.
That's really scary.
Yeah, and that was like the first, it was good in a way. It was like, that was my first day, like, moving back to France. That was my first day back in France, and it really impressed upon me how I'd need to either establish my identity or be able to be okay with people not understanding, because I literally had to explain to them that I have just, I've got a French passport and all of that, but you know, and I was born here as well, but I just haven't lived here for over 20 years.
Yeah.
And they're like, but you still don't know French? And I'm like, well, I do know it, I'm just not comfortable speaking it.
Yeah, so a lot going on there as well.
Yeah. And then it's interesting also that their native language / the language they're most comfortable in has changed over time. Yeah.
Going back to languages, I guess I'm most at ease with English. I know that wasn't always the case. I do still somewhat remember that. But, you know, like, spending 20 years in Pakistan, like, I think, and having to adapt really quickly, because I didn't initially know English either. So as a kid, I guess I had to learn English, Urdu, and Hakka, because I was pretty much in that environment, like, for the first time as well. I think English was kind of like the hub that I could share with everyone around me, whether they were family members or locals, like friends. Actually, I don't think I really learned Urdu until much later, because pretty much everyone spoke English. Everyone around me anyway spoke English.
Yeah.
So
It's
I guess English would be the language that I most identify with, that I feel like the most communicative in.
And for both of them, now it's English.
Yeah, that's fascinating how their language has changed, their language of choice.
But yeah, like David talks about how he was really, like, French was his main language, but now it's English. And
Right. He was in the French educational system for a long time,
Right.
and then went to school in Montreal, to a university in Montreal, and continued with French as his main language until he did his master's, and that's really when his switched.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think they both talk about which language they prefer to use for different types of interactions.
Yeah.
Of course, my mom's Japanese is way, 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 way better than mine. But yeah, as I said, like in our home, we spoke English to be inclusive because my mom didn't speak French. So that's the language we used. I mean, sometimes I try to speak Japanese, but obviously it's very flawed and it's not fluent or fluid at all. But with my dad, I realized that when I speak English, sometimes it's not that it's awkward, but since I know that his native language is French, and since mine is more or less French, it just sounds more natural to speak to each other in French. Because I feel like we can get the message more clearly, and he'll maybe have to think a bit if he wants to express himself in English, although he's very proficient in the language. But I just think that, just to keep the conversation as concise and clear as possible, we'll just use French, because the English creates this imbalanced attempt to find words, and it may lead to miscommunication basically. So overall, yeah, with my dad, it's just better to speak in French. Although, once my mom's there, we immediately switch to English.
Yeah, I love that part. We talked a little bit about that also in episode 7, and I just like hearing what people have to say about it. So Cecil talks about how when he thinks about a night with a bottle of wine and talking with friends, that's the French part of him.
It's weird, right? So for me, enjoying like an evening out on a porch with friends and wine and stuff, if I picture doing that, I picture that in French. In like where I was living, for example, it was very common. Like I would spend most evenings that way with my neighbors, just sitting by the pool out on the porch, bottle of wine, or 3 after dinner,
It's France.
Yeah. Well, you drink stuff while you converse, and
right.
Yeah. So to me, that's a very French thing, and it's something I would like to do in English. For some reason, I just don't have that same connection with it when I'm with people speaking in English. For some reason, I always go to with either beer or my usual whiskey, and we talk about stuff for sure. Obviously, that's a gathering, but it feels different. There's a different energy about it. There are no like grapevines over our heads or anything like that. It's not. Yeah. It's like a completely different universe almost. And the same I love those family dinners. I guess like Thanksgiving or something where it's like all homemade meals, and like between 8 and 10 people gather around one table, all eating the same stuff at the same time. To me, that's a very Chinese thing. Yeah. To me, that's a very Chinese thing. Like I love trying out different Chinese foods and stuff. Like I like trying out food anyway, but especially in China, it's like really cool to be able to sit around a table and share the same meal and like all the different dishes and all of that.
Yeah, the family style sharing.
Yeah. To me, that's a very Chinese thing, and being in that situation, my head automatically goes to Chinese, to Hakka, and even Mandarin.
Yeah. That's and what about English? Is there any instance where you really identify?
Like watching a sports event or drinking beer at a bar. That's very English to me.
Yeah. That's cool.
And so it's interesting. Urdu is to me like an international thing. Do you know that mindset you get in when you go traveling somewhere and you're like, I need to pick up what the local language ASAP, like know how to count money, names of places, transportation, hail a taxi, whatever, like toilet.
Yeah. What's the word for toilet?
Yeah. So that mindset that you get into, right, when you're abroad. For me, that's a very Urdu Pakistani thing, and that's when I'm eating out and stuff, that I'm like calculating, I could get this much for this much amount, and is it going to make me sick?
Yeah.
And that's like,
it's your Urdu
it's
side.
Weird.
Man.
Overall, I mean, I'm the kind of person who thinks that identities are not fixed. I think someone has multiple identities, right? And I would say that when I speak French, yes, there is a certain attitude I have, I guess, because French people within themselves, they act, for example, if like when you don't know each other, when you're foreign or like strangers, basically, French people are very polite to each other. They use the vouvoiement, which is like you have to use a special way of addressing to each other. that you don't use in English. In English, you say you to like everyone, right? But in French, you have to change this vocabulary. You have to use this other term. So, there's all these kind of elements that you need to consider when I speak French to a stranger. And plus, I feel like maybe my humor will change a bit too, because I know that French people, they're very, very sarcastic. Like 95% of the humor is sarcastic. So, yeah, I guess on this standpoint, my mindset will kind of alter a bit, and I'll know, okay, I'm in France. Like, this is the attitude I need to have. This is the kind of humor I should have. Whereas when I'm in the US or in the UK and I'm speaking English, I just feel that generally speaking, there's a much more, especially in the US, a much more laid back attitude. People are just so friendly and, easygoing on the street. You can just like strike a conversation with someone and it won't be seen as awkward. Whereas I know that in France, if you just like randomly hit up someone on the street, they'll be like, like what's the purpose? Like what's your point? Like what do you want? You can't just casually talk to someone. So I guess in the US, I'm a bit more, I have this kind of attitude where I know that, I can just be more sociable and I can just be more laid back, because it'll be socially acceptable in the country.
I really liked that. And then I asked Cecil, do you have any advice to new parents of third culture kids? Because, this community of people is really growing. The number of third culture kids that we're going to see in the next 100 years is just, I think it's going to skyrocket as the world grows closer together.
It's so weird to think of myself as being in a position to hand out advice. Honestly, it's just go with the flow. Like, seriously, I feel like we're living in a day and age where everything's so globalized, and yet you have parents and adults complaining about our young ones are adopting that other culture and this other culture, and like, get over it. We live in a world with the wider internet. I mean, people are just going to be, to various degrees, like kids growing up nowadays are just going to end up somewhat multicultural.
Yeah.
It's going to happen, okay? You'll have a French kid living in some small village in this countryside of France, watching YouTube and picking up Filipino culture. Like, it's going to happen. Just get over it and go with it.
Yeah.
If you oppose it, you're probably not going to end up not understanding it and making a distance between yourself and your kid. But that applies even more so to third culture kids, I think, where I think parents need to be just as adaptive, for sure. And I know it was easy on me. I got lucky that at least one of my parents, my dad, he speaks like 7 different languages and he's traveled in various parts of the world. And I don't know that I would have as open a world view if I didn't see that happening in front of me. Like, I didn't have a person I could observe doing the same thing, like speaking different languages and being able to switch back and forth between cultures. And I think it does add more openness, more appreciation, understanding, tolerance, whatever it is, the ability to connect. And I think kids sort of growing up in that, 20 years from now, that might just be the norm. 20, 30 years from now.
At least among,
large,
educated communities.
Yeah, and especially large, cities, melting pot type cities like New York and now even in China,
Yeah.
That might just end up being the norm. And it's just something to expect and just work towards. That's the whole thing about Star Trek, right? The Starfleet thing is you combine the entire human race, and then eventually all species across the universe towards a common goal, which is cooperating together, living together, understanding, and all of that.
So I liked what he said. Just kind of embrace it.
Yeah, me too. And yeah, I think just by using our observational skills, we can already see that there are more than before.
Yeah.
If you think about, I don't know, even kids that you knew, maybe in school or definitely from university, how many did you know versus maybe how many did your parents know? And I guarantee you the number is higher.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I've met a lot of third culture kids, missionary kids also.
Yeah, I mean, let's see. Anne's not really third culture, but in a way, kind of.
How so?
I always get mixed up, but I think her mom is French, her dad is Belgian. She grew up in Belgium, but then when she was like 14, moved to Sweden.
Oh, okay. That's really cool.
Yeah. And so she then went to Swedish school, went to university there. And since then, she's done, I think what's typical of a lot of third culture kids is like living in lots of places and kind of not having the typical roots that a lot of people have. And so they're a bit more free to migrate, to move.
Yeah. Huh. It's so interesting.
Yeah.
Actually, Anne left us a really great Lost in Translation moment in episode 5, which that's all I'm going to say about it. If you want to, like, pee your pants in laughter, go check that out.
Yeah.
Well, so yeah, I think that pretty much covers everything about third culture kids. Obviously, we talked to 2 of them, and their experiences were so incredibly different.
Yeah.
But every third culture kid's experience is just going to be unbelievably different, like super unique. And I think that can be a challenge also because they are so different and they might have trouble like kind of finding a way to deal with it because it can be common to feel alone in that situation.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely true. And how do you relate to someone about your experiences, which are so different than most people's?
Yeah, I was reading this article by the BBC, which I can link to, and they talk about how third culture kids have trouble when they move to a place where there aren't a lot of international people. I mean, obviously they usually come from a more privileged upbringing than average, but it's not because they chose it, and they have trouble kind of explaining to other students what their life is like because they just sound like they're bragging.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
I mean, it's kind of like I'm not a third culture kid. I wish I was a third culture kid sometimes. It sounds super interesting. But, like, when I went back to the U.S., I remember talking to friends about, like, oh, yeah, when I was in Korea, we made a stop in Taiwan or whatever. And, oh, this really crazy thing happened when we were in the Philippines. And it doesn't sound like I'm telling just a crazy story about my time in the Philippines. It sounds like I'm like, oh, listen to me tell you about the Philippines. It's my privileged life. So. Yeah. Whereas being back here, everybody's been to the Philippines. So, oh yeah, I went to Boracay last weekend. And that's one thing I think maybe I like about living abroad is I meet people who've had a lot of similar experiences to me, just because it's a lifestyle choice. So.
Yeah. That's definitely true. Well, cool. Shall we move on?
Yes.
To our Lost in Translation.
Da, 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 da. Well, this week, so we have a Lost in Translation moment from Linus, who is actually my friend in China. And this is actually something that neither of us has heard. So I'm really stoked.
Hey guys, my name is Linus Lias. I am an English teacher in Shenzhen, China. I've been doing this for a couple of years now, but I remember the first year I was working in China, I would always see students in the hallway, and the customary thing for students to do is to say, hello, teacher, and then kind of bow their head and they would walk away. And they would say this in English to me, being the English teacher. And that was fine. And, if you choose to acknowledge them, which I usually do, I would usually just say something like, hey, what's up? How's it going? And I would go about my business. And I always noticed that whenever I would reply, students would get kind of nervous or shy. You know, they would do maybe giggle because they were nervous about the English teacher, right? And that was fine. You know, I just went a solid year just saying, hey, what's up? How's it going? How are you? You know, it's varying reactions. Well, I was hanging out with my Chinese friend, and something happened, and she said, oh, what's up? I was like, hey, I've noticed that a lot of Chinese people will say, what's up? What does that actually mean? What does that translate to? And she was like, oh, it's kind of like the word, it's the F word, basically, you know? When people say, what the fuck, or, oh, fuck me, or, you know, some variation of that, you know, that's kind of what Tao means. So I was like, oh, okay, interesting. And then there was about 10 seconds where I was like, wait a second. What Tao sounds a lot like what's up. So it basically just hit me that for a solid, 8 months, students would be coming up to me in the hallway saying, hello, teacher. And my response would basically be, oh, what the fuck? How's it going? And then I would be on my way. So for a solid year, it was like that. And I really wish that I had known that earlier, because if you didn't know, a lot of words in Chinese sound very similar to each other. So in China, we have something called WeChat Pay, and basically you can pay for everything on your phone. You just need to give them your QR code, right? And sometimes it's unclear who scans who. And in English, you just say, oh, do I scan you or do you scan me? And, that's how we do things. But in China, the word for scan is sao, and that's easy enough. But once again, the word for is tao. And I would like to think my Chinese is pretty good, but it's not good enough, because there have been more than a couple of times when I've been in the back of a cab and the guy takes me to my destination, and I'm like, yeah, and he's like, it's that's $20 or something like that. And I'm just in the back getting my phone ready, and I just say, 你找我吗? 我找你吗? And if there are any Chinese people listening to this, they're like, oh man, this Chinese is so bad. That basically translates to, can I f*** you? Can you f*** me? Yeah, so I've totally just bypassed the entire problem by just never speaking Chinese again. So that's my story, guys. I hope you enjoyed it.
Oh my god!
Wow, that was such a good story.
Both of those were awesome.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. those little kids just scared and
what's up?
Not really sure.
Hey, what the f***? How's it going? Yeah, so thank you so much. That was wonderful.
Thank you. Those were great.
And actually, Linus is a stand-up comedian here in Shenzhen. So, yeah, so he's also really good at telling jokes. That really helps. But I don't know if he has... I don't think he has a website or like a YouTube channel. I've told him that I want to help him make it, but I don't know if he has it. So, but if he does have one, we'll link to it. If not, then I'll help him set up a YouTube channel and make him right.
All right. Well, I think it's that time of the week.
Time to wrap things up.
Yep.
Well, if you know a third culture kid, or you are a third culture kid, or I guess we should say third culture individual, then we'd love to hear your experience. I'm sure that it's just like Cecil and David, I'm sure it's super interesting and super unique.
Yeah.
And so we'd love to hear from you. If you want to send us a little voice recording on our contact section on our website, languagenerdsdoearth.com, or you can just write us a comment in the show notes or on our social media. we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. And please subscribe to the podcast if you enjoyed it.
Yeah.
That way you won't miss our new episodes when they come out.
Mm-hmm.
And follow us on our social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest.
Mm-hmm.
And we like to post some interesting things throughout the week to keep you entertained.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and for our own entertainment as well. And please send us your lost in translation moments. You can send us a voice memo to languagenerdsdoearth@gmail.com, or you can record it on our website under the contact section, or you can just send us a comment anywhere, and we'll read it on the show.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And please, if you could, take a moment to leave us a review on iTunes.
Mm-hmm.
They really do help people to find us. And so it would be awesome if you could take a moment to do that if you're enjoying it.
Yeah.
And yeah, tell your friends about it if you like it also.
Yeah, exactly. And our next episode is going to be about getting sick while traveling.
Mm-hmm.
So we have some stories about that. You can also subscribe to our blog. We like to write about some of our experiences traveling and living abroad. If you want to check that out, you can put in your email address in the subscribe box on our website.
Yeah. And I think that's just about everything. So thank you so much for listening.
Yeah, thanks.
And we'll see you next week.
Yep, have a good one.